To put it succinctly, John Merrow is the leading educational journalist of our time. That is not an overstatement. The leading journalist in education of our time. In 1974, he began a weekly series called Options in Education on National Public Radio. 8 years later, he moved to public television, where he became a fixture on the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer. In 1995, he created a nonprofit corporation called Learning Matters, and he writes a weekly blog called Taking Note. As a journalist, John has taken on the challenge of explaining many changes now underway in American education, and in the process, reminding us of the importance of quality public education. He does this with passion, he does this with intelligence, and he does this with great skill. Over the years, he has taken on the toughest and most controversial education issues of the day, and he has approached them with the highest journalistic standards of fairness and impartiality. John has brought his reporting, a conviction that supporting the best possible public education system for all young people is an urgent priority, and for the health of our economy and for our democratic institutions. John's interest in education began in the mid-1960s, when as a recent graduate of Dartmouth College, he taught high school English for 2 years in Port Washington, New York. It's probably fair to say that while working as a journalist, John has never stopped being a teacher. But today, his subject matter embraces all aspects of American education. His classroom is the airwaves and the internet, and we are all his students. John Merrow, the voice of education. Would you please join me at the podium to accept the 2012 Harold W. McGraw Jr. Prize in Education.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope I can get through this. I want to thank the judges, McGraw-Hill. I was speechless when Terry McGraw called me, and those of you who know me know that rarely happens. I want to say it's so appropriate that we're celebrating in one of the world's great libraries, public libraries, because I actually grew up in a library family in a small town in Connecticut. And the public library was a part of our lives, as my siblings, Marty, Hattie, and Rob, can attest. We made lots of visits as kids. Our mom devoured books. And so it was no surprise that my sister Marty ended up working at the public library in this small town in Connecticut. And more than once, Marty told me about a story that I should do for NPR or later for the NewsHour. There was this one man, she said, who regularly visited her library. He was gracious, he was unfailingly polite, he was generous, he was gallant. And I said, excuse me, Marty, but why is that a story? You know, thinking, I'll trust my news judgment. What does my sister know about this? And she said, well, what's interesting is this man is in a position to have any book he wanted brought to him. He didn't have to go to the library. He had his own publishing company. Why? But yet, he would go to the library all the time. I'm sure you figured out by now that the small town was Darien, Connecticut, and the special patron was, of course, Harold W. McGraw Jr. And the man whose life we honor tonight, and obviously the apple doesn't fall far from the tree because Terry and Nancy and the McGraw family have continued to support that library. And I guess my sister Marty had better judgment, news judgment than I do, because I should have done that story. Changing gears, when you recognize me by recognizing the work of one particular education reporter, you're also honoring education reporters and education reporting generally. You're acknowledging its importance in a complex world. So on behalf of the 300 or more practicing education reporters, I thank you. And you may not know it, but you're also honoring dozens and dozens of my colleagues at Learning Matters and the NewsHour. I mean, television is a team sport. Because I'm the one you see, I receive most of the credit, far too much credit. You know, I've worked closely with some amazingly talented men and women over the past 38 years. You know, they've made me look good, far better than I deserve to look. And more than once, they've kept me from disaster. There are too many to mention, but I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge publicly Jim Lehrer, Robin McNeil, NewsHour executive producer Linda Winslow, Les Crystal, and my longtime colleagues John Telenko and Michael Josoloff. Thank you, yes. My company's a nonprofit, and we do rely on contributions from foundations, and two foundations have made such a difference in my life, and they're represented here tonight. The Hewlett Foundation, Barbara Chow, the education director, and the Wallace Foundation, Will Miller, the president. They have meant so much to me, and I thank them. And my wife is telling me not to thank her, but she's a rock. So, thank you. Yeah. Now, I've been trying to figure out what, after 38 years, I know to be true about this field that we all care so much about, what I know to be true. And I want to quickly go through 5 truths. There are more, of course, but for the rest of them, you'll have to read the book that I'm working on if I ever finish it. But truth number 1, it takes a village. You know the rest of that. It takes a village. That is so true. Now, most school people try to do it all, but they cannot. You know, teachers seem to me have an attitude of, put me in, coach, I'll do it. And they do. They try. But I think it's time for other agencies in this society to pull their weight to help us grow children into adults. So that's the first truth. It takes a village. Second truth, trust but verify. Time was we trusted teachers. That was when opportunities for women were very limited, and so the teaching force included hundreds of thousands of immensely talented women. We trusted them, occasionally perhaps more than we should have, but we trusted them. Now the world has changed. Luckily for them and for us, many of those women are doctors, lawyers, business leaders, politicians, and more. Some are still in the classroom. But it's demonstrably true that the entering qualifications of teachers today are not as impressive. However, the society has swung crazily from trust to mistrust. And it's all now about verification. How can we test these teachers and get rid of the ones who... It's creating a horrible atmosphere for classroom teachers. Ronald Reagan wasn't talking about education when he said trust but verify. He was talking about the Soviet Union. But his wisdom applies to education. We need to find balance. We need to develop trust, faith in the men and women who teach our grandchildren, and then we need to work with them to develop sensible and reliable measures of effectiveness. Trust but verify. The third truth. The question I listen for when I'm talking with educators, the question I want to hear them ask is, how are you intelligent? How are you intelligent? Too often, however, I hear them, the people in charge, asking, how intelligent are you? And there's a world of difference in just changing those words around. Those who ask, how are you intelligent, are proceeding from a health model, building on the strengths. So that's the third truth. How are you intelligent? Fourth truth, measure what counts. Measure what counts. Instead of being satisfied with simply counting what's easy to measure. The McGraw Prize and all that it stands for is a platform, an opportunity for us as a people to talk about what matters. What do we want our children to be and to be able to do? The business of schools, the business of teachers, is not limited to reading, writing, and arithmetic. A school's primary function is to help grow adults. So that's the fourth truth. Measure what counts. Finally, fifth truth. We are what we repeatedly do. That, of course, is the wisdom of Aristotle, who added, excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. Now, let me just put that in the vernacular of youth. We are, like what we repeatedly do, So, like, excellence is not an act, but, a habit. So, now, I put it in the vernacular not to mock young people, even though, like a lot of you, I have complained about how casually, even inarticulately, that's a bad word to stumble on, that they speak, and many don't write well, many don't seem to read at all. A lot of us have had that awful encounter at in the checkout line with a young person who can't make change. But remember, Aristotle's wisdom, we are what we repeatedly do. That applies to our children. So then let's ask the central question. What do our children repeatedly do in school today? Now, you may want to go look for yourselves, but I can tell you what you'll see. You'll see three things. Inane regurgitation of answers. Too many of our schools are answer factories, but this fast-changing world needs citizens who can formulate questions, who can sift through the flood of information that engulfs them 24/7. Need to formulate questions so they can turn that information into knowledge. So they can separate wheat from chaff and choose the wheat. That's one thing you'll see. The second thing you'll see is test preparation. You'll see kids practicing filling in bubbles. You'll see kids working through strategies for eliminating one or two of the answers from a multiple choice so they can increase their chances of guessing the right answer. And you'll see kids writing three-sentence answers to a prompt and making sure to include the lines from the prompt in their 3 sentences, and that's what passes for training in writing. Who would hire people who write like that? And yet finally, you'll see test taking. American kids are the most tested kids in the world. That is what they repeatedly do. No wonder they're sloppy and inarticulate in their speaking, writing, etc. We don't ask them to do more. So if we want them to become citizens who think and speak clearly, who read with understanding, who write thoughtfully and persuasively, that is what they should be doing repeatedly in our schools. To ask less of them is to deprive them of their birthright, and it is also a threat to our democracy. I absolutely support what Terry said. Education is the bedrock. It's not about unions, charter schools, using test scores to evaluate teachers, merit pay, class size, and any of those other hot-button issues. Those are skirmishes. Those are distractions that divide us. It's about what is happening in our schools, hour after hour, day in and day out. That should be the issue that unites us. Now, the McGraw Prize, honoring people at my table, Freeman Hrabowski, Yvonne Chan, Barry Rosenstock, Jim Comer, honoring men and women like that. They're the people who shape the debate. This is an opportunity that we must not pass up. I would say, stop cursing the darkness. It's time to light candles. And it's a long past time for predicting the deluge. Let's build arks instead. I thank you very much for this honor.